but you also want to have that wisdom that you have now, like looking for red flags, looking for yellow flags with just people you interact with, not even necessarily just in relationship wise, and paying attention to your body too, just how you're kind of responding to an interaction with someone.
Hey, 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 you are now tuned in to the It's the Human Experience podcast. Listen, today we have Lauren Wickline. We are going to be talking through all of the things. Listen, welcome, Lauren. Welcome.
Hi, Hazel. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. Listen, if you haven't listened to the It's the Human Experience podcast, I need you to go ahead and hit that follow button. If you're listening to us on any of the podcast streaming platforms, if you're watching from YouTube, be sure to hit subscribe. I'm not going to skip a beat. I want to go ahead and dive into the episode. So the first thing I want to ask you, Lauren, so our listeners can learn more about you, is who's Lauren?
Oh, that's a loaded question, isn't it? Well, so I am Lauren. I am actually a licensed therapist in the state of Virginia, a licensed mental health counselor. I work in different settings and have worked in different settings. I currently do inpatient psychiatric work at a hospital, and I also do outpatient therapy as well. But who is Lauren? Again, it's a loaded question as well. So I am very career oriented. I've always loved working with people, helping others. I have always enjoyed theater, dance, that sort of thing. And I love metaphor, and I love narrative therapy and storytelling. And it's definitely something that I incorporate in all my settings when it comes to different therapeutic techniques and practices.
Got it. Yeah. And that's important work. So definitely thank you for the work that you're doing, because mental health is really at an all-time high in terms of like the crisis, both in adults and children. And so I love that you're doing that work, like you're in the work and actually making impact in the things that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for bringing awareness of that on your podcast. I've listened to a few episodes, and one of the episodes that hit me was the pandemic, the loneliness, and, is it a post-pandemic problem? Has it increased? It's just a lot of things to unpack with the loneliness factor, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think the more that we share our stories, our voices are heard, is the more people will realize that they're not alone and that it's okay to share your story and your journey. And that as we're going through the experience of being a human, right, there are so many things that are not perfect. And it's okay. It's okay to share your story. So I love that.
Yeah, thank you. And again, your guests have been just really inspiring, and I think that's really important too. I always say social media can have some problems if it's used in the wrong way, but it can also, I feel like it's been a big blessing in a lot of ways for a lot of people, especially during the pandemic, because there are more things that are becoming more awareness, such as things like narcissism and invalidating relationships, that kind of thing. So it really has grown a lot, the social media platform, which I think is a good thing when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, and I want to sit in something around that, because many times you'll hear people say, I don't like social media, I don't like everything that it brings, but you make a decision in who you want to follow. And
Yes.
so it's very important to realize like your feed and your stream are typically based on the things that you're continuing to watch, where the algorithm are like, ooh, she likes pretty shirts. Let me show her a pretty shirt.
Right.
So if you're trying to budget and be obedient to your finances and stop looking at pretty shirts. But I share that to say is we have an input and an impact in what shows up for us on social media. So we can create those boundaries and making sure that if we want to see people that are inspiring or sharing information on the things that are important to you, we can follow those outlets and channels. And if we don't, we can make sure that we're not touching and tapping into it to where our feed feeds us as opposed to hurt us instead of healing us. So
Yes, absolutely. And I always talk about this too to a lot of my patients and clients as well. It's definitely okay every now and again to take a social media detox. I always find that very helpful, where it's just phones away, get outside, sit around the dinner table, read a book, and that's also good too. But the good thing is a lot of these social media outlets now, I think like Instagram, TikTok, whatever the major players are now, that you can kind of filter it a little bit better, like you said, to make sure it's not harming you, it's healing you, to follow content that's helpful.
Absolutely. What would you say is one of your greatest superpowers right now?
Oh, I would say resilience. Right now, resilience. I did recently experience a heartbreak, and this was back in April. And I've decided, instead of holding up, I'm going to use this experience to try to help other people when they might be experiencing similar things in their relationships, whether it's invalidation, abuse, that sort of thing. So I would definitely say resilience is my superpower right now.
Yeah, and you need that, right? When you talk about heartbreak and really having to grieve a relationship, it's
Mhm.
just something that you have to like own. And I'm sure in the work that you do every day, like you have to prove to yourself, like, Lauren, you can do this in the same way that you tell your clients you could do this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually do even talk a little bit about this in the blog that I'm doing and just on my website, because yeah, I mean, the first word of my blog, unfortunately, is the word shame, and I definitely wanted to start unpacking that, because you're right, Hazel. Sometimes we are the biggest hypocrite. I'm telling all these patients and clients, this is what you need to do to kind of heal through it. And in the beginning, I was finding myself not really doing those things myself. And that's when I really had to kind of totally re-examine, as you talk about in your other episodes, the aha moment of, no, Lauren, we really have to start this healing journey and really start telling the story and just re-examining everything. Because I think once you start re-examining everything just for yourself, it becomes part of your practice too. And I think it's going to enhance the work that you do, or the work that I do with other people, if you practice that self-care for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. In terms of like that reflection in that process really brings you so much more armor, one for the future, and then also helps you have that relatability in the work that you do every day. And I think that's a crazy part about life is like we will get into the fields and the practices that we're doing, and we feel like we're an expert and like, yeah, I learned all this stuff. I've had 5 years of experience. And then life decides to life. And now you
Yep.
it in a different way. And you're like, hold up. The way
Yeah.
I learned it in textbook and the experience that I have by helping clients win in the last 5 years is now different because now I have to look in the mirror and I have to apply it. And because of that application, it's funny because I'm sure for you looking in rearview mirror in terms of Lauren early on in her career, post Lauren after the breakup, you know the feelings of your clients like too good to where you're able to help pull them out even better. And I feel like until we go through the thing ourselves, we don't have the level of relatability, even though we have the knowledge, the compassion, and the insight. But when you have that experience, the person that you become is just so much more, it just like fearful in the sense of your competitors can't touch you because you have that personal experience as opposed to just having that textbook.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's, I heard, I forget who I was listening to. I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking about, there was actually another therapist who unfortunately experienced a really horrible abusive relationship. And he was actually talking on that podcast about, we have all the textbook knowledge, especially when it comes to like the cluster B personalities, like narcissism, sociopath, all that. We have all the knowledge, but it's not really touched on a lot in grad school, for example, because it's very rare, and in some cases, it can be very subtle, unfortunately, and they can appear very subtly in different relationships, like with the Peter Pan syndrome.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit more about the Peter Pan syndrome and how your personal relationship kind of even parallels that syndrome.
Yeah, so Peter Pan syndrome, it's not an actual term in the DSM-5. It's not an actual diagnostic code, if you will. So basically, it was coined back in the 1980s by Dr. Dan Kiley, and it was based out of a book called The Peter Pan Syndrome: Men Who Have Never Grown Up. And a lot of that is related to people who have narcissistic traits that may not necessarily be on the full spectrum of abuse, grandiosity, that sort of thing. And so basically, some of the traits and characteristics of this people who have this syndrome, it's difficulty with responsibilities and commitment, being very self-centered, avoidance of criticism, difficulty in controlling impulsive behaviors, all those symptoms. So they may not necessarily fall on the abuse spectrum, but they cause a lot of problems in relationships, as I now see. And the more I'm reading about it more, I think we need to bring that term back because everybody knows the Peter Pan and Wendy dynamic, and everybody knows the story. And I like to tell everything in my practice through metaphor and story. That's always been my thing. And I feel like that term needs to be brought back to understand it better, to kind of figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think that is so important, like to even be able to share like things that people go through, like in relationships or marriages, whether it's friendship, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the
Hmm.
case may be, and things that you really need to look out for. Because when we think about like being our authentic self and really owning your voice, sometimes there are signs that we see that are happening in our relationships, not necessarily just from the perspective of a Peter Pan Wendy syndrome, right? But even just losing yourself, right?
Yes.
Just abuse, like really feeling like your goals are not aligning with the other person's goals and you're starting to lose yourself or feel stuck. Like there's so many things that we need to be aware of because I'm sure in your relationship, as you kind of think about the Peter Pan Wendy syndrome, there must have been things that you started to unfold and see before you had to make the decisions about like what direction to go. Like what were some of those telltale signs for you?
Well, I guess if I had to look back on some of the early stages of it, I guess maybe not necessarily red flags. I call them yellow flags because, again, it's not necessarily abuse or things like that. It's, again, that impulsive behavior, instant gratification. A lot of times people with this syndrome, they tend, and now, again, I'm not here to shame anybody who likes things like poker or playing slot machines every now and again. That's fine. But people with this syndrome, they tend to want stuff like that often and instant gratification. And as just like the character of Peter Pan, it's fun. I mean, I think it's great to bring out our inner child and just play and have fun. But however, at some point, you have to be a grown up. And for me, with this person, it was always, hey, let's continue. Let's stay up late. Let's keep partying. Let's do this. And even though me, I have to get up in the morning. I have to be an adult. I have to work. So that's just one little small example of that sort of emotional immaturity that we see with people with that. And then with the Wendy syndrome part of it, and the part that I've had to really sit and reflect on what I participated in this dynamic is, so the Wendy syndrome is basically kind of a codependent people pleaser. And a people pleasing is not being kind. It's not being your authentic self, as I think you've talked about in a previous episode. But the Wendy syndrome tends to almost act as like a mother figure to the Peter Pan in that relationship. And we see now that's not appropriate for a partner.
Absolutely, because it sounds like within that process, Peter is trying to stay in essentially the Neverlands of just
Correct.
magical well-being while Wendy is trying to grow, find herself and become her best self. And so it's almost like you're being pulled in that situation. Like I like having fun with Peter sometimes, but I kind of have to go out there to the real world to work to your point.
Right, exactly. And it's not to say that people with this syndrome, they don't have jobs and whatnot, but they do tend to be a little bit more sporadic when it comes to things like that. Again, like that instant gratification. And then the main thing is just the inability to conflict resolution is a problem with someone with Peter Pan syndrome. They tend to literally, like in my case, fly away. They literally run from it instead of in relationships addressing, hey, let's talk, let's have a conversation. They tend to just want to avoid. And then that's when you see things like going to play with the Lost Boys, for example. We'll use that metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's definitely not healthy because communication is imperative in any relationship, let alone
Yeah, absolutely. And, you have to deal with things like moods, highs and lows, and you'd have to kind of figure out, hey, we had a conflict, let's figure out how to address that. What can we do to sort of work towards that? And people with this, they tend to avoid it completely.
Yeah. So just in the work that you do and in the work that you have to do within your own self in terms of staying true to your authentic self, realizing like this poses a problem for me and my
Hmm.
growth and where I'm trying to go, both emotionally and just moving to the next level in my next chapter. Like, what are some ways that you can take small steps to really find yourself as you move towards that?
Well, I would say the main thing is focusing on your self care every day, especially when you are in a high stress work environment. And also, in a way, getting back to who you were before some of these events happened. So one of the things I kind of had to sit with myself was, when did I become a Wendy? When did I become just this people pleasing and codependent, anxious attachment? And I had to kind of sit with that and say, well, where did this come from? Because at one point I used to love to play by myself. I used to just, go outside by myself and in the garden and read books by myself. So I think sometimes we have to have that reminder of that part of our childhood of, well, wait a minute, we can do this. We don't have to be a codependent and a people pleaser to our partner or anybody. And just doing that inner child work is helpful as well.
Yeah, I love that to anybody because so many times you could be codependent on a partner, your friend, family members, whatever the case may be. And I think to your point, it's so important to remember like there are times in our lives where we've had to do it on our own. Often we're born here by ourselves. Our
Yeah.
parents had part in it. But separate from that, we had to develop our own identity. And it's important that we don't lose ourselves by really identifying who we are in terms of our worth to the relationship that we're in and realizing that just like you were able to thrive and do things on your own before, you can absolutely bounce back from this and find your way again.
Yeah, absolutely. But I always say with, you want to get back to yourself, but not quite, because we don't want to have rose colored glasses on. Again, we don't want to stay in Neverland. We'll stick with that metaphor. You definitely want to have, like I was saying before, that fun inner child piece of your life, but you also want to have that wisdom that you have now, like looking for red flags, looking for yellow flags with just people you interact with, not even necessarily just in relationship wise, and paying attention to your body too, just how you're kind of responding to an interaction with someone. I think just that self awareness of, ooh, this interaction didn't make me feel good, or oh, I didn't really like that, and just being aware of it and how you want to address it, depending on what the situation is.
Yeah, I love that in terms of like that following your gut, your instinct,
Hmm.
and seeing and just being okay with saying, hey, this does not sit right with me, and seeing the trends around your feelings with that specific person or situation so that you can decide how to move forward.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it takes a while, as you know. It's been a process for me, and you're gonna have moments where and there's gonna be days where it's hard, and there's days where you feel lonely, and it's just. But again, if you stick with that self love and that self work that you do every day, you'll find. And what I've been finding, the interactions, who I want to be around versus who I don't, and like my social media, what I want to see and what I don't. You find that it's a little bit easier setting boundaries.
Yeah. What does your daily routine look like in terms of your mindset routine to help you show up for yourself?
Well, so it's really interesting how, like with podcasts, yours being one of them, I do have a commute to work about 45 minutes. So I actually decide to use that time as that is my self care time. I'm going to use this commute and just listen to inspiring podcasts on the way to and from work. And then in the evening, I try to just, well, especially if it's a nice night out after work, I try to just be outside, be with my dog, see friends and family when I can. I'm mainly on the weekends, but and just the exercise is helpful too, and just making sure that you're, try to go to bed at a reasonable hour. And I definitely like the unwinding time in the evenings, whether that's reading something or whether that's listening to. I really enjoy meditation music, even just on YouTube, and just kind of sitting in bed and just letting everything from the day go. I find that that's been really helpful lately as well.
Nice. Yeah. It sounds like you figured out what kind of gives you peace and value, and you've stuck with those things because you realize when you stick with those things, you show up as your best self.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And for the longest time, when I was in this relationship before I was discarded, and I look at that now that that was a blessing that I was discarded from this, that this person discarded me. Because yeah, I hadn't been reading much. I had been so focused on is he okay, and making sure that he's got everything he needs, that sort of thing. But then you realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm an intellectual, and like what you said, Hazel, one of your episodes, it's not deep. I don't want to talk. Right. And you get back to that, and you get back to reading and the stuff you enjoy watching and the people you interact with and conversations, and it blossoms again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I touched on that in the Deep Connections episode in season one. And it was so important because we are all going through the human experience. And if we're going to sit here and talk about the weather and talk about brunch that we're going to go on in 2 weeks, like we're not talking about what we're really facing and feeling each day. And we're here to connect and really make a difference in each other's lives. And if we skip over those real things, then what's the point of the conversation?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's okay every now and again to take, I call it a brain break. After a day of, let's say, doing therapy sessions, sometimes I just want to say, I want to watch like a cheesy reality show for 30 minutes, and that's definitely okay too. But kind of like with Peter Pan syndrome, if we stay in that play, superficial Neverland, I feel like we don't actually grow as humans, just financially, physically, spiritually, all of those
Yeah, I love that you share that as well because I definitely have my mindless moments to where I'm going to throw on some Real Housewives and I'm
things.
just going to watch it and it's just going to be just mindless. And it's not that I feel like it's adding value. Actually, I don't want to think about anything. I just want to laugh and look and just enjoy. And that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all about taking brain breaks for sure. I think that's important. So as far as you're saying, like with making deep connections with people, yeah, you can only talk about the weather, but so much.
Exactly. Listen, I want to make sure that we kind of talk about some myths on the journeys as you went through your healing, as you've gone into your career. Like, what are some things that have come up for you that you're like, this was not true. I wish I'd have known better.
You said some myths about healing.
Mm.
Oh, well, one of the biggest ones is wanting it to happen quickly. Because when you're in the middle of heartbreak, I call it, you're in the shock and sorrow phase. You have difficulty eating, appetite. It's like the basic self care you're struggling with, and of course, when you're in it, you want to just be out of it quick. And one of the myths I've learned that healing is not linear. You are going to have days where it's going to be, I'm having a great empowering day, and then there's going to be other days where it's just, I really just feel sad and I just want to do some self care, lay in bed for a little bit, and that's okay. But as long as we don't stay there, that's the main thing, is making sure we're monitoring things like depression symptoms and whatnot. So that was one of the myths, that it's going to happen quickly, because it does not. Another myth is realizing that not everybody is in your corner when they say they are. That's kind of a difficult thing to learn, and this came about in like mutual friends. I always say you always have to be very mindful if you're going through a breakup, and these mutual friends, we want to make sure they're not. I don't know if you've heard the phrase "flying monkeys" from. Well, we're switching metaphor now from the Wizard of Oz. So flying monkeys refers to people who um, a person who has narcissistic traits, or like the Peter Pan syndrome, they tend to bring people in to kind of just, I don't know, validate them, make sure that you look like the unstable one, do their bidding, that sort of thing. So definitely being mindful of who is really true for you, who your true friends and family are. So that was another myth too, learning that not everybody is supportive of your healing journey, for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of like that hurt people hurt people. And it's so important to realize like everyone has not done that reflection work and they're not on their healing journey. And if they're not, then some of their limiting beliefs can pour over into your healing. And then you'll essentially think, wait, something's wrong with what I'm saying or what I'm doing. But there's actually nothing wrong with what you're saying or doing, in the sense that you're healing in your way on your own track and time. And so,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing I had to overcome is just some limiting beliefs after this happened because yeah, you do have those moments of well, what did I do? What's wrong with me? Why did this person discard me? And again, I'm not sitting here saying that am some sort of saint in a relationship because I'm not. No one is perfect. But the main thing is with relationships like this, people tend to really doubt themselves and just say, again, what's wrong with me? What did I do? If I had just loved them more, if I had just done this, or if I hadn't gotten upset that one evening, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So really having to overcome self-doubt is an important thing to do too.
Yeah, I think that often what we don't realize in relationships, whether it's with a partner, a friend, or whatever, is that there's a thing called seasons, right? And so
Yes.
maybe there's something that we're supposed to learn from that person, to where we realize what our boundaries are, what our deal breakers are in the way that we show up for ourselves and the people we invite in our circles. And so too often we look at it as we lost something and we actually gained something. Like we gained knowledge, we're able to see our full strength, and you're able to see like, oh, this is not going to happen going forward because I know what to look out for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I love that metaphor too. It's a great metaphor to use, like seasons. You know, we have seasons just like of life, but however, well, I mean, I live in Virginia, so I actually do get to see all four seasons. But the roots of the tree are there; they stay throughout the year, no matter what, whether there's no leaves, green leaves, red, brown, all of them, and that's a good metaphor I think for life too. I know several people have used that, but yeah, you really have to figure out who is going to be there for the roots part of your life, where you might be sick or you might be going through something. Are you going to be there for all seasons, or are you just going to again fly away to Neverland when things get rough?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's so important. It definitely is important to me. And I'm glad to hear that it's something that's important to you, because to your point, like those people that are anchored in the truth of your being and your journey, whether things are good, bad, or indifferent, because they wholeheartedly love your spirit as opposed to just kind of what's going on in your life in that moment. And so I'm glad that you shared that, because that's very important in terms of healing, reaching your goals, becoming the best version of yourself, is having a circle of people that are truly there to support you and their intentions are pure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes with the healing journey, that circle might get a little bit smaller, is what I found, and that's okay. And because again, I think when we're younger, especially growing up when social media was coming about, it's this many followers and how many friends can I have, and let me just be out there. But you'll see, and I think people see that too. It just starts getting smaller and smaller in the real world.
Yeah. It's funny. My mom used to say, I'd rather have three good friends than a whole slew of friends. And as you get older, you see why.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I remember my parents would say that too, my grandparents. And, when you're younger, it's like, oh, I want a lot of friends. But no, you see, when you get older, that's basically the truth. You've got those solid people who will be there for all seasons of your life.
Love it. Where can the listeners find you online?
Sure. So I actually am mainly on Instagram. It's a public account, and I have my website and blog there. And so my name there is Lauren, spelled Lauren. It's underscore wiki. But yeah, on
Yeah. And I'm
Instagram is the best part.
Okay, perfect. And I'll make sure that I link that down in the show notes if you're listening, so that you can go ahead and follow Lauren. Listen, Lauren, I appreciate your transparency, all the gems and information you shared as someone's on their healing journey, and just realizing like what things they need to look out for just to make sure that they are honoring their truth, their selves in all aspects of relationships, and just making sure that they grow into the best versions of their selves. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Hazel. It's been an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Listen, if you're not already following the podcast, please make sure that you scroll up to the top, hit that follow button. If you're watching us from YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. We're on all podcast streaming platforms. We would love for you to leave a comment so that we can hear your greatest takeaways, so I can bring on more amazing guests just like Lauren, because we want to add value, drop the gems, and make sure that you realize you're not alone and you can absolutely grow into your best self. We're rooting for you.